Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. It may be true that the only thing certain in life is death and taxes. We may cover death on another show, but we're here to assess a far-ranging challenge to how taxes are collected in the city and beyond. This has become more pressing as the issue of rising income inequality between the so-called 1% and the rest of us in the masses below has taken center stage in civic and political discourse here and frankly across not only the nation, but the world. In New York City, revenue for our $94 billion annual budget comes from a variety of sources, with $64 billion of that coming from taxes and the rest from an assortment of fees and grants from state and federal governments. About $13.5 billion comes from personal income taxes, just over $8 billion from sales taxes, $4 billion from corporate taxes, $2 billion from unincorporated businesses, $2.5 billion from real estate transfer and mortgage recording taxes, and about $4 billion more from taxes on cigarettes, commercial rent, hotel rooms, utility bills, what have you. The largest amount, almost $30 million, comes from property taxes, and that's what we'll focus on tonight. Unlike in the rest of the state where homeowners get an annual property tax bill for schools and government operations, most of us who are apartment dwellers pay property taxes indirectly through our rent or our co-op and condo maintenance fees. That is likely why we do not see the political uproars common outside the city over property taxes, except, of course, in vast swaths outside Manhattan, including Southeast Queens, where one of our guests tonight is a state senator, where single-family homes dominate. There are deep inequities baked into the incredibly complicated set of formulas the city uses to set its property tax, formulas which have left similarly valued properties facing vastly different tax rates depending on where the property is located and how much it is either sheltered or punished by gentrification, which has increased property values far beyond the ability or even the legal authority of the city to keep up with the changes. That has led to a remarkable lawsuit challenging how the city imposes property taxes by a group called Tax Equity Now, which has brought together an eclectic set of plaintiffs that more commonly are at each other's throats, from the Latino Justice PearlDeaf to the NAACP, to the Real Estate Board of New York and the Landlords Rent Stabilization Association. Without getting too much into the weeds here, the city taxes property based on 4 classes. 1, 2, and 3 family homes are Class 1, condos, co-ops, and rental buildings are Class 2, utility properties are Class 3, and Class 4 are commercial properties. Even within property classes, inequities are glaring. Multi-million-dollar homes in Park Slope, for instance, pay the same or less than homes worth far less in Bedford-Stuyvesant or Canarsie. Similarly, the suit argues the city has made politically driven choices that undervalue co-ops and condos, shifting that tax burden to owners of rental properties, who in turn add those costs to rent. In short, the suit argues the city is, and I quote, systematically imposing disparate tax obligations on similarly situated property owners and shifting the city's tax burden from favored to disfavored groups rather than on the basis of any rational or equitable connection to their property's actual market values. The city and the state, both named as defendants in the Tax Now suit, acknowledge the inequities but tried to have it thrown out of court as beyond the court's jurisdiction and tried to blame each other. As of now, the suit is going forward and the stakes are extremely high. We all have skin in this game, and if the city is forced to overhaul a tax system it acknowledges is rife with inequities, some will pay less and some will pay far more in taxes as a result. We're joined by 4 New Yorkers involved in studying and dealing with the implications of the city's tax system. State Senator Leroy Comrie represents a homeowner-heavy district in Southeast Queens, in and around Jamaica, and formerly served on the city council. Anna Champagny is Director of City Studies and a property tax analyst for the Citizens Budget Commission, which is a plaintiff in the Tax Equity Now lawsuit. David Birdsell is a professor and dean at the Mark School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College, and John Banks is the president emeritus of REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York, another plaintiff in the suit, and formerly served as finance director for the city council. Anna, let me start with you. Give us a brief explanation of how we got to this lawsuit to challenge the tax system.
So one clarification is CBC is not actually a plaintiff
I'm sorry,
to the suit.
Nor is REBNY.
You're on the Tax Equity Now website.
Yeah, but we're not plaintiffs.
Yeah,
I'm
I think,
sorry, okay.
I think there are a number of organizations
I'm sorry,
that support.
You're supporting the lawsuit.
Yes,
I
yes.
apologize.
So,
Okay.
so we have filed amicus briefs in support of the suit, but I just wanted to clarify that. So the suit was filed back in 2017, as you said, by a somewhat eclectic group that has come together to argue that there is disparate impact, and that under both federal and state laws and the Constitution, that the result of the inequities is to inequitably treat different properties and, by extension, their owners. So the suit argues that because, for example, renters and rental buildings tend to pay a higher tax burden than homeowners, and by and large in New York City, minorities are more likely to be renter households than they are to be owner households, that there is a sort of a disparate and discriminatory impact on the property tax that needs to be remedied, and that the state law, they're also sort of arguing that they are sort of improper, I guess that they're not properly following some of the state laws regarding uniformity, which sort of addresses some of these inequities that were discussed, where you can have properties in the city that have exactly the same value but are in different neighborhoods, and because of the economic conditions in those neighborhoods, pay vastly different property taxes. And that it does violate one of the basic principles of tax policy, is that you would like equity across similarly situated properties. So these are some of the arguments.
John, you've looked at this from multiple angles over your career, this kind of a question. State law doesn't allow you to raise the value of properties by the full amount. In the case of gentrification, you're capped as to how much you can increase.
Correct.
And if you don't pay so much, somebody else in the same class has to pay more. Why?
The short answer is politics. The system was designed back in the early 80s as a response to other litigation that set up the four property tax classes. It actually took place out in Nassau County. And the result was the court said, yes, you are right, the system is not equitable, but as courts are wont to do, they don't impose a remedy on it. They send it back to the legislature, and the legislature came up with this Rube Goldberg property tax class system, in which the four property tax class systems each has a certain amount, their share that they are required to.
The share of the entire property tax that goes into the city.
That's right. And so each class share has to raise a certain amount of money. And because of the politics, class one, single family homeowners, 1, 2, and 3 family homeowners, was protected because they are very politically powerful. Class two, which co-ops chose to be.
Which are essentially multiple unit dwellings.
Multiple unit dwellings, right, co-op and rental. They chose to be in class two, not class one, because there was an advantage for them to be in class two at that point. So over the years, close to past 40 years, the political environment has sought to keep the property tax extremely low on class one properties.
On single 1, 2, and 3 family
Correct.
homes.
And somewhat low on class two properties through co-op and condo abatement programs. So part of the reason that the political dynamic is such is that class 1, 2, and 3 family homeowners scream bloody murder whenever their property tax goes up. As you indicated in your opening statement, class 2, particular rental folks and people who don't see the impact of that change in their property tax class. When I was in the City Council Finance Division, we made great hay out of holding the property tax rate stable for 10 years. Never mind that the assessments went up every year for different property tax classes in different ways, and that further made the inequity even greater.
Leroy, your district is kind of on the front lines of this fight.
Yes, it is. And I've joined the lawsuit. I've sent a letter in support of the lawsuit. I can't file You know, I'm not a plaintiff, but I
You're kind of suing, since you're a
so-
state senator, you're kind of suing yourself.
well, but
It's not Devin Nunes. He can't actually rule on something that he's involved in.
But I've joined the lawsuit in terms of supporting it and supporting the need for it to happen, because what has happened over time is that areas such as mine that don't have the homeowners that are sophisticated enough or have the time to challenge the assessments every year have been overassessed, and other areas of the city have not gotten at the same level of assessment or attention. And like Park Slope, where they didn't even do assessments, or they did minimal assessments every year. So there's a real inequity, there's a real discrimination in how even the assessments and the
But how
formulas
much,
are done.
how does, I want to get to David, but how does gentrification factor in? There's obviously neighborhoods like Park Slope that have, Fort Greene, places that have.
But that's the other problem, because one of the other issues is that they compare, when you're doing assessments and comparables, they compare Southeast Queens to Forest Hills or to Belrose or the Jamaica Estates, which is higher tax bracket. The houses are more valuable, but we get lumped in that same equation, which creates a skewer, because our property value, or when you actually try to sell your home, you're not getting that same amount of money. And then I also have a problem where I have many civil service people, many retirees that are locked on fixed incomes, and they're not able to keep up with the cost of the assessments every year. Almost every week, I'm having 40 to 50 seniors calling my office or coming to my office because they just can't pay their bills anymore.
David, this is an issue where somebody's ox is going to get gored. The politics of taxes is one of the. It's not that there are a lot of third rails, but it is a third. It is a third rail. Give me the context of the kind of political pressure, rising economic inequality, rising perception of economic inequality, which is reflected in this lawsuit.
Well, absolutely, and that's one of the things that's actually bringing these disparate parties together in this instance. But make no mistake, this is extraordinarily complex. John described this as a Rube Goldberg creation. I think the estate of Rube Goldberg may sue. None of his machines were as complicated as this tax structure. And it's very difficult for anybody, elected officials, anybody, to tell a clean story so that everybody knows where they come out, depending on how you change the regulations. Everybody likes to cut taxes, and everybody likes to hear that their taxes are going to be cut. You might be happy to hear that that other person's tax rate is going to rise and they'll take a larger share of the burden.
Don't tax me, you don't tax me, tax that guy behind the tree.
That's right, and let's take it out of the 1%. Let's take it from those $7 million homes ringing Prospect Park. That might be tidy and neat, but it's going to be a much more dappled effect all across the city, and it will be very, very easy to light people up with the prospect that they're going to get hit with large raises. I'll add one more tax imperative to Anna's list, and that is the notion that you don't change taxes so radically, so quickly that people become unable to afford their lifestyle. And that's part of the concern that the senator just made with regard to his own constituents. If you want to make this work, it's going to have to be a multi-year phase-in to get to the genuine equity that I think everybody wants to see, but is extraordinarily difficult to accomplish.
Go ahead.
Well, I think in terms of understanding the inequities a little bit more, we often think about their inequities within the classes.
Yes.
So each class, as John said, has to pay a certain share, and that share is allocated, and it's basically a zero-sum game. If someone pays less, someone else pays more. And in that case, you have features like a cap, which is being alluded to. The assessed value can increase more than 6% each year in Class 1 for the 1, 2, and 3 family homes. But if your market value is going up 10%, your value is only going up 6%. Someone else's value may only go up 3%, but their assessment can still go up. And this is sort of the fact that these two strands, the market value, sort of how much your home is worth, and your assessment, which is what your tax is based on, don't necessarily move in parallel, is what has caused inequities within the class. The second piece is you have inequities between the classes, and that stems from the class share. That no matter how you redistribute the money or the tax liability within a class to make inequities, you're not able to adjust the relative burden of, say, rental buildings to 1, 2, and 3 family homes, or what we haven't talked about yet, to commercial property. And in the general sort of consensus is that rental buildings and commercial property face a higher tax burden than owner-occupied homes. And those are sort of important.
One of the reasons is, and I want to talk a little bit of politics on this, is, I made the point about indirect payment. Everybody pays these taxes. People, the fact that you don't own a home, that you rent a home, you may think that you're exempt from this issue, but you're not.
Right.
That's correct.
I mean, you are paying more in rent because there's been this favoring of co-op and condo owners because of the politics of how this stuff gets set up.
And even with the commercials, if you're taxing utilities more, it winds up coming back to you in your utility bills because the Con Ed is going to go for a rate increase every minute, and they're going to use the property tax as its National Grid, the phone companies, they're all using it as a rate increase, and it's just cost more to do business in New York as a result. So there's no one that's not impacted by this. Every resident in the city is impacted by property tax.
And one of the tools that are used when you make the city budget is when you have the inequity in class shares, you can shift that burden around depending upon whether or not their share has increased by the prescribed percentage. And so, for example, with utilities, both utilities and commercial property were often the place where, in order to make a political decision to keep the burden lower on Class 1 and Class 2, residents, they would shift that burden to Class 3 and to Class 4, utilities for Class 3 and commercial property for Class 4. And so the pain was never felt because there was always this easy pressure relief valve to shift it over to Class 3 utilities and Class 4. And as the senator said, the utilities have virtually a direct pass-through for any property tax that is increased. The Public Service Commission, which regulates how utilities raise their resources, generally allows the utility to just pass that increase on through to the customer. And the absurdity is so large that the utilities are not even allowed to list that tax on their bills, so that they can't even send the price signal to their customers, so the customer could get engaged and go, wait a minute, why are my utility bills going up and up and up? It's property taxes. I once came very close to convincing the Bloomberg administration to allow the commercial property and utility property to merge the classes into one class. My theory is that it would generate, I'd get the heft of the commercial property behind the utility property, and they would get my customers to complain about it. We got very close, but there's, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, right?
But again, this is, we're paying in the end.
Somebody's paying.
This is, this is an abstract debate,
Right.
but there's real dollars coming out of real people's pockets. That's kind of how, and this debate is somewhat abstract, so there's no pressure on it, especially in a city like New York, where you don't, by and large, pay your taxes directly as you might in Nassau and Suffolk and Westchester.
Well, absolutely. It's the opacity makes this very hard to figure. And we're dealing right now without clear proposals on the table. There are people who have put them forward. Former City Finance Commissioner Martha Stark held a conference on this very issue earlier this year and came up with a number of different possible models. But in terms of active proposals in the policy arena, they're not there. So if we're trying to think about exactly what the impact of a hypothetical set of fixes, which may contain in the fullness of time, I'm not predicting this, but just, again, hypothetically, if you mandated that any reduction in tax result in a pass-through reduction in rent or utility costs, or whatever the case might be.
Very big question.
It's a very big question. That's a different kind of appeal, but the complexity is enormous at that stage. And the regulatory burden to make sure that everything that you might want to see happen happens. And I've got to just put this marker down there. We're talking about it while we have particularly the Democratic candidates for the presidency talking about their own massive restructuring of the national tax policies for wealth for the first time and for income. in which we'd have to understand multiple levels of anxiety for lots of people trying to figure out where they come out in this equation. It's always been hard in proclaiming tax politics.
And just to let you know, the state Senate became majority Democrat last year for the first time in 12 years, and there's a lot of focus on us and to legislate a lot of these issues. In fact, I just left today with Anna Forum that Senator Brian Benjamin, who is our chair on I forget his title.
Corporations.
No, I'm corporation.
He's housing.
It's budget and revenue.
He's budget and revenue. He's budget and revenue. I'm corporation, so I remembered my title. But we're actively seeking ideas to do the legislation in case, because the reality is that the mayor may never come out with the suggestions. He's termed out. There's no pressure on him to do it, but there's a real need in the city to make these changes. So we've had a series of town hall forums. I've held one in my district. I'm holding another. He's been having town halls around the city to get reaction from homeowners. But what we also are seeking is reactions and information from experts like Anna and John and to Professor Birdsall to figure out what policies we can enact on the state level.
Well,
one of the issues that we realized today is that the city's ability to impose an unlimited levy every year is a big problem, because even though the politicians and elected officials try to save 1 and 2 family homeowners by keeping them at a 2%, if the levy on the city
2% increase in assessment.
10% increase in assessment.
Right.
If the city's still doing a levy, it just obliterates the whole 2% in actuality. So there's some fiscal responsibilities that we all going to have to face.
And the senator raises a great point that virtually nobody pays attention to. OMB is doing all sorts of cartwheels and handstands to try to manage around the levy cap, and
Explain what the levy cap is.
So the levy is the amount of taxes that are raised in totality.
The total amount of money.
Right, and so the levy has to stay, it doesn't have to stay constant, but you can't really go beyond the statutory limits of the amount of the budget, because there are debt service and other obligations that put constraints on that. The property tax is the only tax that the city can unilaterally make changes to. However, it's subject to the statutory cap, and they are bumping up against the statutory cap, and therefore what OMB is attempting to do, and have been doing for many years, it's not just this administration, it's prior administration as well, is they arbitrarily, or at least they, in their mind, think it's legitimate, but there's those who question how they calculate the levy, and so they shift expenses off to other entities that gives them additional gap in the growth of the levy, but they are running out of places where they can maneuver in this particular way, which, if you're not confused yet, you should be had your head examined.
One of the arguments is about tax simplification, that this is accreted over time with, instead of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, you just keep kind of adding things, adding little shifts, and you wind up with this. Again, I happen to agree with David that, Rube Goldberg ought to sue. One of the things that Martha Stark was talking about was, why don't we think about 2 classes of property, residential and commercial. Right. Just, that's one, and some people argue, why should you have even 2 classes? Why not tax property based on what it's worth? Based on market value. Right. Are those too simple? Because somebody's going to pay more and somebody's going to pay less.
It's simple, but there's complications to everything. Unfortunately, you have you have people that are in commercial properties that are living and working in the commercial land, and they live on it. You have a lot of folks in my district. I have a lot of absentee landlords from both large properties and people that have been speculating buying dozens of houses in a distressed market because we had a problem with a lot of vacant homes in the area. So they would come in, they buy up 10 homes, they're flipping them every other minute, or they're doing them as rentals. Do you tax those people the same as you do a senior or do you tax a veteran the same as you do a new homeowner? So and everybody wants an exemption. It's like the whole congestion bucking that they're planning on doing next year. Everybody wants an exemption. So once you start, and we, unfortunately, traditionally,
Once you start an exemption, somebody else has to fill that gap.
Everybody wants everybody else wants to come up with their own exemption.
Right.
So even like
There's going to be one person paying $30 billion in taxes.
right. So the other tough thing that we're going to have to do is how do we eliminate exemptions? How do you not overburden people? And how do you figure out a way to make all of this palatable in a situation where reality of politics is that the person who screams the loudest is going to get heard.
Well, you talked about the national politics and, the Democratic presidential debate. We were, until very recently could deduct these high taxes on our federal taxes, state and local taxes. We could deduct them. We can't do that anymore.
That's another reason not to vote for
we
this
just
guy.
capped at $10,000, and as your property goes up in value, gentrification makes that $10,000 far more reachable for people of very modest means.
Right.
Part of the policy decision to keep the property tax low in New York City as compared to Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Orange, Rockland County, and the surrounding communities was that the overall tax burden on a New Yorker is higher than on a homeowner in those counties.
Right.
Even though their property tax is much
That's
lower.
right.
I remember when I was a reporter, we got the Far Rockaway, and if this is the Nassau City line, a home on the city side may pay $3,000 in
right.
taxes. For the same home on the Nassau side, they may pay $15,000.
That's right.
But we have all these extra taxes.
Then we have personal taxes, sales taxes, unincorporated business taxes. We used to have a tax that we eliminated that I can't even remember anymore. We used to have a commuter tax that became part of a political fight in Albany.
For a Rockland County seat that the Democrats lost, but that's
and the Republican who won it just retired last year,
Yeah.
Senator Larkin.
Right.
So it again, as the senator says, everybody is going. Martha Stark has a saying. She says, the property tax class system here in New York is so convoluted and crazy that not one person in any tax class believes they're getting a good deal. Everybody thinks they're getting screwed, right? No matter what your relative tax burden is, nobody is satisfied with it, and there's no clarity, and it's not easy.
And again, just to kind of make it relevant to people who are paying rent, a lot of that burden is being shifted onto landlords, and you're paying it through your rent, even if you don't realize it.
So one fact, and we dealt with this up in Albany in the last legislative session when we were trying to deal with the rent control issues, and we also dealt with it when we did the extension of 421A, or Affordable New York as it's now known. The average multifamily rental building in the city of New York pays somewhere between 30 and 35% of their gross income in property taxes before they take a penny for anything else, for renovations, for profit, for whatever else you think. The city is getting 35% of every dollar that goes into multifamily rental housing, which further complicates the ability to build additional rental housing so that people can have more affordable housing. It's a very basic supply and demand. There's not enough supply of apartments in the city of New York to meet the demand, and therefore the price is elevated. I speak with my advocate friends, and I ask them, do we all agree that there are going to be 1 million people here in the next 30 or 40 years? And without hesitation, everyone goes, yes. I mean, well, where the hell are we going to put them? Right? If we do not start to build aggressively and we do not address the property tax inequity for multifamily residential housing, then we're going to make the problem worse.
And in the lawsuit, this is one of those issues that it's easier to point out the problems than it is to come up with a solution.
Yes.
The questions are easy, the answers are hard. Is there a vision of, is there an end game vision through the lawsuit?
Well, I think in the lawsuit, they're seeking a ruling that the system needs to be changed to address very particular inequities and to address some of this disparate impact. I don't think they're asking for a specific set of changes. But there have been sort of conversations, as the senator alluded to. There was a forum or a roundtable earlier today where there was a lot of discussion about what some of these changes might be. And a lot of the conversation actually focused on market value, which is what you start with. Determining what is the value of each piece of property before we even decide how much of what the tax rate would be. And the city's Department of Finance goes through this process every single year. They come up with a value. A lot of it is set in state law, so there are certain things that the city has flexibility in, and there are other things that isn't. One of the most sort of illogical things today may have made sense back in 1981 when it was set up is that the city is required to value co-ops and condos based on rental income. So for every co-op and condo building, they look for comparable rental buildings and they determine if this building were a rental, how much money what would be the income, what would be the expenses, and what would be the value based on that income stream if I were buying this as a business rather than as a home. And the result is that these values are substantially lower than anyone's actual values. And this creates a lot of, I guess this feeds into the sort of distrust of the system. Starting from the value, most people don't believe that the value that the Department of Finance puts on their value at all represents what their property is worth. And from that, you have all of these other rules regarding how the caps can be done, how this is done. No one can understand the calculation, or most taxpayers can. And so there's a lot of distrust about what all of these values. And you really need to, I think, for the reform, first you need to start with 2 classes might work. It's a very simple system. You could have 3. I mean, there are different ways to classify, and I think you need to have an articulate policy reason for why you're classifying the way that you are. But then you need a good market value that actually makes sense to the property owner, that yes, this is a reasonable estimate of what my property is worth. And then you need something that's much more simple. That
Let me ask a question.
Require.
Your point about requiring, and again, it's hard to avoid the weeds in talking about this issue, and I apologize for that, but we're doing the best we can. The requirement that you assess co-ops and condos as if they're rental property.
Yes.
In a time of great gentrification in particular areas, which dramatically raises the value of those co-ops and condos, but they're being assessed at the level of the rental properties, means that the taxes that the co-ops and condos are not paying are being imposed on the rental buildings. Am I explaining this properly? That, it's one way in which people who are owners are getting a break, and people who are renters are getting hit without them seeing it.
I think the classic example is the quote-unquote Derek Jeter problem, right? So the building that...
I'm a Mets fan, but...
I'm a Yankee fan, and it pains me to have to say it, but it is what is out in the public domain. The building that Derek Jeter supposedly lived in paid $3 million in property taxes total. Derek Jeter sold his apartment for $25 million. And that was not taxed. So one apartment was valued at more than the rest of the entire building, and the tax was determined based on the building and not the sale.
In other words, the apartment sold for more than the building was assessed for.
Correct.
Right. But it's the taxes that are not paid on the market value of Derek Jeter's building, and as a Mets fan, you want to attack Derek Jeter, it's fine with me.
This will be after, bro.
So, the money that was not paid by Derek Jeter's building has to be paid by an apartment building in Bushwick or the Bronx.
Not necessarily, because the opportunity cost is not calculated in the total levy, right? And
God
so
help
that
you. Go ahead.
Right? So probably a good thing. So that I would say that if the apartment was valued at its market share, there would be more, not that it was shifted to others, right? The levy is held constant for the most part.
So go ahead.
But it does, I think, contribute to the fact that you were alluding to, which is that the city is not building enough rental housing.
Yes.
Right now, the property tax system favors co-ops and condos, and therefore developers are more likely to build co-ops and condos, especially in the absence of tax breaks.
Or
Rental
market
housing
rate
is
rentals,
very hard
building market
to
rate rentals.
make the finances work without either some sort of subsidy or a tax exemption, and that contributes to the sort of housing shortage or the supply of if you read about luxury housing, there is a lot of luxury housing that was built. To some extent there may be a glut of it, because that's what is financially viable sort of under the current system.
Right.
One of the things that's at one level blazingly obvious, but it's worth mentioning outside of the commercial property realm, we're talking about people's homes. We're talking about places where people live. And the tax policies are one important contribution to the built landscape of the city, but they're not the only one. We have public housing. We have options to create, although it's been a long time since we have, create public housing. There are options to change rental support formulas, although it's been a long time since the federal government funded those adequately. It's important too, it seems to me, to remember that when we're talking about a kind of wealth tax, in my cooperative apartment building in Greenwich Village, the average price of a co-op apartment since we went co-op in 1985 has increased 300 times. Okay, it's a tremendous increase in value. We still have plenty of people living in those apartments who were retirees in 1985, and they're still living there. The only way that they could keep up with a monetization of their tax burden that's consistent with the value of those properties would be to sell it. And then you get gentrification on steroids in certain neighborhoods. So if we're talking about not only the impact on the budget, but the impact on neighborhoods and the impact on individual residents, I think it's important to think about this in terms of a broader basket of housing policies rather than simply the tax impacts
I want to
alone.
also ask you, if I could, to kind of broaden this beyond even housing and beyond the city. And you brought up in your opening comments about this tax inequity. This fits into the arguments about about income inequity, tax
Absolutely.
inequity, which is being debated within the Democratic Party, among the Democratic presidential candidates. Is there a national context to what we're going through on a local level?
Oh, I think absolutely. Although it's a very different story depending on where you're having that conversation nationally. Right now, among Democrats, there's considerable enthusiasm for, at the very least, if we take Vice President Biden's tax proposal released today, more or less a return to where we were in November of 2017 before the Trump tax cuts. There are some changes, but more or less that's the argument. And then for dramatically increased efforts to try to build the federal treasury through Elizabeth Warren's wealth tax, through a number of different things, sharply higher tax rates, only going, by the way, back to where we were in 1965 with regard to top rates, but a big conversation.
Well, not that high. I mean, 65 was 70%. I don't think
Well, that's where Representative Ocasio-Cortez is right now. So, I mean, these are serious proposals being advanced, and I just wanted to suggest that there is, the way that this would change the nation's economy if we put all of these things together has very different appeal depending on whether you're in a blue state or a red state, an urban area or a rural area, and how easy it is to get people to think about their circumstances in the context of whatever the proposed tax policy change is. If you think just back to the, in my view, disastrous but relatively easy to understand changes from December 2017 in the Trump tax plan, which we first saw go into effect in the last tax year. It was very difficult to give you a sense of where you'd wind up if you earned $40,000, $60,000, $120,000, and those were predominantly income tax changes, as well as corporate tax changes as well. If we try to walk through everything that we're talking about today and then layer it on a wealth tax in addition to your local property tax structures, that will be mind-numbingly difficult to describe to voters. And my guess is that fear rules in those situations because you're not going to vote for something you don't understand.
That's right, and that's why there's such inertia in the whole property tax debate, is because every time you poke it, there is a problem that pops up in somebody else's community district or advocacy that says, there's no way I'm going to do that. To the professor's point, the elimination of state and local tax deductibility, capping it at $10,000, there was 60% of the country that is meaningless to, right? It has absolutely no impact. In the East Coast, in Los Angeles, in California, where you have high property tax states, that is devastating to the local economy. And because there are consequences to elections, right? And so the red states got a big benefit out of it, and blue states got screwed unbelievably by it. Yep.
And I would hope that, I would hope that, people remember that and then take that to heart next year when these elections come up, because we really need to change that paradigm. We really need to get rid of 45 and go on to 46. So I would hope that, because, and so I would hope that this audience would, and whoever's watching this would call their friends in those states that are swing states to make sure that we change. And I know technically in CUNY forums we're not supposed to be political, but I can't, this is hitting everybody's pockets. It hit out my personal pocket because I wound up having to pay to federal tax for the first time and since I've owned my home for 25 years. It's ridiculous that I've had to now given the federal government money for my tax burden has changed significantly.
Focusing on the lawsuit, the judge is not likely to order a specific change. He's liable, if you're successful in the lawsuit, he's liable to say, the current system is not acceptable, you got to change it.
Right.
Should you scrap the whole thing and start from scratch?
No, I mean, I don't think the idea is that radical. I think as Professor Birdsell alluded to also or mentioned, you want to do a slower transition because you're going to potentially increase or decrease taxes. I mean, it's probably easy for the folks who would get a nice tax decrease. But if there is an increase, you don't want it to hit anyone all at once. So you do need to have a phase in, and you do need to do this sort of more gradually.
But you could do that in the context of scrapping and slowly change it to a radically different
system. I don't. I think that you're still going to remain with some level of classification, would be my guess. That this idea that you would have favorable treatment for residential property relative to commercial property, that this is something that, I think there's political support for in the city. And I think, but it could be wildly different. It could also only be mandates. It could be what happened last time, because the outcome of the last litigation, as John said, was basically what the legislature enacted in the end was laws that said we're just going to make the current system legal.
Right.
So there's absolutely no guarantee of sort of what kind of change you would get or the extent to which you're going to have.
But as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, which I often am on these issues, the fact that you can't, again, we're talking about neighborhoods which are being gentrified. The state has imposed a cap on how much you can increase assessments. Am I correct on that?
Well, there was a statewide cap, except for New York City. I'm not sure if it got enacted the last time there was a cap. I know they talked about it, but I don't remember. But
so you couldn't raise the assessed
without
value.
Even
if the assessed value went up 10%, you couldn't raise it that much.
But there was the local legislative body could vote to go above the cap.
Right.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, there are probably a dozen caps in the property tax system. There is, in the city of New York, there is a cap on how fast the assessed value grows. And you're right about that. There is a statewide cap on the levy, which is the total amount that can be raised, which doesn't apply to New York.
Just to kind of make this relevant to people, for instance, who are renters, if Derek Jeter's apartment goes up, if co-ops and condos go up high, but you can't tax them, but the tax system can't raise the assessed value by the amount of the increase, somebody else is paying that bill.
Well, the cap...
Because rental properties are not going up that high.
The cap only applies to 1, 2, 3 family homes, and then there's a slightly higher cap for 4 to 10 unit family, 4 to 10 unit multifamily homes. So larger co-ops and condos don't have a cap. Commercial property doesn't have a cap. They have this 5-year phase-in, which is a little bit more of sort of a moving average or a smoothing, so that the changes aren't as abrupt from year to year. So in fact, the average property tax bill has gone up about 6% a year or more for the last probably 10 years or so. Assessments have gone up about 5 to 6%. The cap is about that for class 1 and 2. So they are in fact going at that rate, and it goes higher. I mean, it usually increases more quickly for condos and for rental buildings.
Except for the city council annually lowers the cap for class,
Class one.
1 and 2 and shifts that burden to class 3
That's
and
the
4.
The cap on the class share, yeah.
There's a cap on the class year.
There's yet another cap.
Is the other cap, right?
It's the cap on the class share, but it still doesn't help the assessment.
And again, the cap on
Right.
the class share, so we don't get lost here, is that single, 1, 2, and 3 family homes have to pay X percentage of the property tax, and then you have to figure out how to
And that increase is capped at 5%.
Multiple unit buildings have to pay X percent
Right.
of the total property tax, and how you divvy it up is where you wind up with the fights. Let me take a question. Tell us your campus and.
Good evening. My name is Fatima Noor, and I'm from Queens College. So I had a question about the tax equity bill that we're trying to pass, and I wanted to know, is there going to be an oversight or supervision committee that's actually going to make sure the corrections that are being made are for the people, and who will be part of this committee?
So the litigation that is ongoing now is again in the courts. The mayor, de Blasio, committed to appointing a commission to study this issue, and they are, I guess, about ready to put out a preliminary report. And that committee is made up of a broad group of representatives who are all working on this issue, and they all have various degrees of expertise. So something is being looked at. The problem is the politics and the timing of that commission report gets complicated, and so the report was due out, I believe, last summer, the beginning of last summer.
Right.
It's been delayed at least 2 times, and part of the reason it's delayed is because they're trying to come up with something that fits in this very rigid box that they've been given to try to fix.
And also because somebody's ox is going to be gored.
Absolutely.
Right, and everybody will be upset with whatever comes out.
And people whose ox is not being gored will think they're being.
That's right.
They're being gored.
And
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Jigita Chaitram. I'm from Lehman College. So my question is, currently CUNY is planning on raising tuition to cover certain costs and the plan on cutting certain program and changing class size. With problems with adjusting paid and disparity among students, what are some financial strategies that could better serve our student population and adjust without resorting to raising these fees?
Well, I'm going to let you handle that, but I mean, rising CUNY fees, rising, food costs, and rising rent, rising taxes.
right.
It's all part of a.
It comes down to the need for the city to continually raise revenue. When I left the city council, the city's budget was about $53 billion. Now the budget is $93 billion. The need to continue to find ways to raise revenue is never ending. Unfortunately, as this property tax is the easiest way for the city to collect revenue, and because of the levy that's been unrestricted, and we haven't really pushed in on the city to figure out how to balance their budget to cut costs eternally, we're always going to have a need. Unfortunately, while CUNY is facing rising costs to try to just keep up with their ability to keep the lights on and pay teachers, they're still not paying the adjuncts a fair salary. And that's something
Well,
that
they
comes
just
with
signed
us.
the union contract that provides adjuncts with
Yeah,
a
but it's still,
significant raise.
but it's still not the raise they want or deserve. It's only about a third of what they've asked for altogether. It's better than what they had yesterday, but it's still not what they were seeking to do. And I appreciate what the CUNY adjuncts do, and they work really hard. And it's the CUNY system, in fact, is not getting fully funded, and it's that pressure that keeps the need to continue to raise property tax, and it's that pressure that we're going to have to look at in an election year to try to figure out some solutions. And they're asking the state senate in a compressed time frame, because the governor likes to do everything by April to put it in the budget to try to figure out how to come up with solutions on it. So I would appeal to everyone to come to us with their ideas and suggestions so that we can figure out at least part of the solution, because it's not going to get answered this year.
Good.
I just wanted to add to those absolutely spot-on points that it's important for all of us at senior colleges and CUNY to remember that our budget comes from the state rather than the city. So it's state funding that we really need to make up the gaps. But this is not just a New York problem. If we look at 50 of 50 states, net support for universities has gone down. And what's happened as a result, because universities still have to pay their faculty members and they still have to keep the physical plants operating, they still have to buy your Scantron machines to grade your exams, tuition has been going up. And it's been going up more steeply, though it's still lower than the private school costs, which are, of course, significantly higher. We can take some comfort in the fact that CUNY tuitions remain enormously affordable on a national scale. It's still the case that if you wanted to come to the City University from New Jersey as an out-of-state student, you'd be paying less than you do in New Jersey as an in-state student. Pennsylvania is very expensive. Connecticut is very expensive. We've held the line. But it's very important to get more net investment into the system, and that's going to make it easier for us to reduce the burden on students over the long
I want to get another question in, but you talk about what goes on up in Albany. The state appears to be facing a $2 billion or $4 billion shortfall in Medicaid costs.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Assembly Speaker just said, we can't cut, we have to look at revenue. So,
Again, that's why we got to get we need to make sure that we do the full gaming. We need to not let Jersey or Connecticut take away that opportunity from us. We need to really look hard at the marijuana stuff because it's a revenue raiser, even though it hasn't glean the dollars in California and other states that it has. We can't shy away from getting revenue. And another problem that we have on the state level is that the governor has imposed a 2% overall budget increase per year as well. So he's capping us on that end.
Right.
So even if we raise additional revenue, we have to look hard at this 2% cap.
If I may just add one point, it's very simple, it's very basic. You can cut expenses or you can raise revenues. Those are the only two choices, and you have to pick one, and neither one is palatable.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Rhonda Bastian. I am a junior at Queens College. So my question is kind of for the young adults. I'm looking to move out of my parents' house some point in my life. As a resident in New York City, it kind of seems impossible to do so. So is there any advice on how to do so for young adults? I'm going to worry about the property taxes, but should I really worry?
Well,
That's
the
kind
question
of
is,
Yes.
I mean,
So you can do like everybody else, find 6 friends that you want and find a 1-bedroom apartment that you can share.
well,
Or you can start applying for the affordable housing
that's right.
programs now. And you should actually put in an application now because we're building a ton of new units in downtown Jamaica. There's a lot of new housing that's going up. There's a lot of new housing going up in different parts of the city, but you can put in for the affordable lottery. And I would actually suggest that all of you start to do that now because prices are going to continue to go up.
And it takes years to move through that list.
Right.
but precisely what we're talking about here is the degree to which this tax issue incentivizes or disincentivizes the ability to build affordable housing.
Well, that's
what you see in the city with mandatory inclusionary housing, if now if you want to build market rate housing, you're essentially required to include, is it 25% of the units to
So if you want to construct, you have to build at a minimum 25%, and depending upon the structure.
permanently affordable.
Permanently affordable. Depending upon the structure, that can go as high as 30% permanently affordable.
So if you build 100 units, 25 or 30 of them have to be permanently affordable.
Right.
But and the assignment of those apartments, as I understand, is not done by the developer, but it's done by
It's done by HPD.
It's done by the
For
city housing
example, the lottery that is used in order to determine who gets those apartments. So if there are, let's make up a number, 500 apartments, they routinely get 90,000 applications for those 500.
But you can't be in it if you don't win it.
Right.
But you can't win it if you're not in it.
That's right.
But talk about how this issue that we're discussing impacts the ability to provide affordable housing.
It is virtually financially impossible to build rental housing in the city of New York under the current tax structure, because there are three main drivers for what goes into the decision to build a multi-unit building. It's the cost of land, which is purely market-driven, and you don't have much ability to control that. There's the cost of labor, construction labor, which is higher here than any other city in certainly the tri-state area, but in the country in many instances. And it's taxes. And unless you can have a meaningful impact on any of those three drivers, you cannot build a ground-up apartment building in the city of New York. If the tax burden in New York City, which I said was anywhere between 30 and 35% of gross revenues, was the national average of 15 to 18%.
That's for rental properties.
That's for rental properties.
Right.
You could eliminate 421A, J51.
Those are property tax
to
abatements
incentivize the private developer to build
or renovate.
Or renovate in J51. You know, the federal government used to build all the affordable housing, but it got complicated and expensive, and they walked away from it. And then the state did it with Mitchell-Lama in the 60s and 70s, but it got complicated and expensive, and they walked away from it. Ed Koch had free land, so he did it. And now all the land is used, and it's expensive and complicated, and so the governmental apparatus is looking upon the private sector to solve those problems. The smallest unit in that equation, as far as the ability to spread those costs amongst the participants, is being asked to solve a problem that every level of government has walked away from.
Well, it's also, we've got about 40 seconds left. I mean, it's one of my arguments about Mayor de Blasio, who's taken tremendous heat, especially from the left, on the inability to provide more affordable housing. I think he's had to make deals with the devil, meaning your former.
Well, they think the other way, but that's all right.
Right. Yes.
30%.
Right. He's had to make deals with the devil, meaning the real estate industry, in order to get what he could, because there is no. Because you don't have the Ed Koch benefit of
Again,
free
that's
land.
why we need to get to number 46.
We have about 10
so we
seconds
can
left.
Get those federal subsidies. I just want to drop that out.
Yeah.
Oh,
Without federal subsidy to help this out, it's going to continue to be a major problem in the city and nationally.
I have 4 seconds left. I never miss deadline. I want to thank everybody, and we'll see you next time on CUNY Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.